On September 2010 and February 2011, Christchurch, New Zealand was hit by 2 large earthquakes. The world knows that story. We know that story. But the world may not know the story of a little port town, my adopted hometown of Littleton. I want to share with you our story of recovery. This is a story of community resilience, how we bounce back. What I hope to convey to you today is not just what we did, but more importantly, one of the secrets of how we did it. Days after the September earthquake, our medical center was swamped with calls from residents who were okay medically, but really, really scared. Within hours, members of the community organized a group to call, stop by, or comfort 156 frightened neighbors in their 70s and 80s. When help was needed after a large aftershock hit, this care was offered again. In some ways, this story isn't surprising. Research consistently finds that during disasters, people help one another, and we certainly experienced this in Christchurch. What is surprising is how quickly and effectively this community was able to act. How come the residents of Littleton were able to put together a coordinated response with seemingly little effort? After the second earthquake, an elderly couple, Marg and Harry, were found wandering the streets of Littleton. Their home of 30 years destroyed by the earthquakes, they were alone. But again, very quickly, members of the community organized a caring network around Marg and Harry. This caring network found them temporary lodging. They organized a chain of volunteers in the fire brigade to carry a lifetime of possessions from their home. They found them a new home, cleaned it up, moved them in, and even arranged for hot meals to be delivered. And they continued to check on them for many months after. Now, Marg and Harry weren't particularly well known. Their story wasn't widely publicized. So why did the people of Littleton work so hard to embrace and care for them? Are the people in Littleton just so incredibly nice? Or was something else going on here? Now, as a researcher, I'm fascinated by stories like these, but it can be difficult to pinpoint why one community behaves differently from another. But in this instance, I had an advantage. I had been studying the community of Littleton for many months before the earthquakes occurred. I knew their history and I knew their secret. My colleague and I began to do field research in Littleton in 2009. Now, I'm not a disaster researcher, I'm a consumer researcher. I study how consumers get their needs met in alternative sharing economies. In Littleton, we were studying a time bank, an alternative currency. We were intrigued by the time bank. Neighbors appeared to be swapping their labor for free. What were they doing, and more importantly, why were they doing this? Now, time banking is both an old and a new idea. People have always swapped and bartered their labor to help one another. But a time bank is a form of community currency where people use time rather than money as the medium of exchange. I might offer to teach Louise how to mosaic, earning me 1 hour from Louise. I can then get help from Mary in my unkept garden. People describe time banking as good fun because they tend to trade the skills they really enjoy doing: arts and crafts, music, or cooking. But they also earn hours by helping out at the farmer's market, volunteering in school, or offering to clean up the beach. Time banking is unique in that everyone's hour is equal in value. An hour equals an hour, regardless of the skill that's being offered. Time banks are also useful because we can quickly mobilize a lot of labor to solve the problems we care about. So all of these characteristics make time banking a valuable tool for any community. But what we also found was the Littleton Time Bank was building capacities that the community could use in a disaster. 4 capacities were key. The community needed to be able to effectively communicate, work together, share a common culture, and solve problems. Let me give you just a small taste of each of these. Turns out when a disaster occurs, information is a really important shared asset. But people don't have time to verify that information, so they turn to trusted sources. The Time Bank coordinator was a trusted source. Her regular emails were always feel-good communications. In the 4 years we tracked, there was never a negative message among them. They were always upbeat, positive, and encouraging. As one informant told me, they gave her a warm buzz just reading them. And the Time Bank also had the best communication network in town. So when the earthquakes occurred, it mobilized this communication capacity. The coordinator, Time Bank coordinator, was invited into the emergency briefings with the official responders, and then she updated a notice board with information critical for the whole town. Time bankers also staffed the information center, and they invited residents in to get critical information, to share a cuppa, or just a sympathetic ear. But most importantly, this communication capacity was used to mobilize the social capacity. Prior to the disasters, the Time Bank was becoming an important hub organization, linking hundreds of people together in the town. The network had over 300 members, 18 organizations were members, and these people had traded an astonishing 30,000 hours. Just imagine the dense network of social ties they were creating and activating. As one informant told me, the Time Bank created networks within networks that ripple out into the community. Or another said it gave her a larger family to call on, especially after her husband died. When the earthquakes occurred, it mobilized this social capacity, linking people and locating resources. So when refrigeration and generators were needed, the Time Bank members found these resources. When people needed emergency repairs, the Time Bank network created a system to link them with tradespeople. When rubble needed to be cleared, Time Bank members were asked. And with so many damaged homes, the Time Bank network found people safe places to stay. The social network continued to meet the needs of the community over the long years of rebuilding. We also found that the Time Bank was fostering its own unique culture with values that supported it. As one informant described to me, the Time Bank was like a neighborhood wellness watch, or a community where everyone looks out for one another. A community where it's okay to ask for help and assistance, and a community where everyone's labor is equal in value. This shared culture united people in the disaster and made it okay for them to ask for help and assistance. Research suggests that communities that recover more quickly from disaster maintain their rituals and tell stories of survival. The Time Bank mobilized this cultural capacity and held regular gatherings to celebrate our resilience. To commemorate the anniversary of the first earthquake, it held a gathering to stitch hero medals. It held regular events on the street, swapping events to bring people together and get them out of their home. It held a series of educational classes, and it hosted a birthday party in its honor, a time to come together, dress up, and just be silly. Finally, we found that the Time Bank was developing a sense of collective efficacy, or a belief that we can solve the problems we have if we work together. Members were identifying projects, large and small, that required labor and coordination. Members would show up, they'd assess the situation, they'd tap into the expertise in the group, and then they would work to solve the problem. This ability to quickly form effective working groups was particularly useful in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, but also over the long years of rebuilding. As an example, the Time Bank took the humble garage sale and turned it into an important social enterprise in the town, raising funds for many struggling organizations. Each week, a different group is invited to host the garage sale. They ask for donations from the town. They staff the garage sale with hours from the Time Bank, and then they invite customers to support their cause. Since 2012, this Time Bank initiative has raised over $160,000 for more than 34 groups in the town. Let me share one final story with you. Renee's family was struggling financially after the earthquakes. The disaster left her home in chaos. A caring network cleaned up her home, cared for her children so she could rest. When she returned home, she found lavender on her pillow, and she said she felt like she could go on after that. The Time Bank worked because it helped individuals in the community to bounce back, to be resilient. The Time Bank worked because it drew on deep pools of skills and labor. It had redundancy so it could last the long years of rebuilding. It worked because it developed capacities developed and practiced capacities before the disaster struck. It worked because it fostered a culture that valued everyone's labor. And it worked because it created the networks of caring that the residents of Littleton could call on when the unimaginable happened. The United Nations points to the need to develop community capacity and encourage community participation in disaster and preparedness and response. Yet tools to enable this to happen are less clear. Our data points to time banks, an alternative currency, as a secret weapon to enable communities to respond and prepare when disasters strike. Thank you.